Jumping In on Manx Radio
with Howard and Chris Kane.
Hello.
Good evening.
And welcome. And here we are back again like the proverbial bad penny in the brave new world of Manx Radio, where we are alternating on a Friday evening now with our sister programme Sweet and Swing. So this week we are jumping in again, of course, the best in modern and contemporary jazz now on a Friday, but still the same great music and the same presenters. It is myself, H.
And me, Chris. Yes, welcome along to this week's show. As H says, the same jumping in jazzy goodness, but on a new home. And, of course, still online and podcast. So what's changed other than the blink and you'll miss it summer? Well, not a great deal, really. And with regard to the summer, there's still hope. So, H, what hot jazz have you got this week to put you in a sunnier mood? Or are you just staying cool right through to autumn and winter, if you can tell the difference?
Yes, can you tell the difference? I think it's just 2 seasons a year rather than 4. Kenny Barron, a cracking new one, which he brought out. Hey, Kenny, we saw him last year, didn't we? At Dinan, and still playing as well as ever, and a lovely one, Beyond This Place, just out very recently. The Low Whistle. There's an interesting one for you. We'll tell you a little bit more about that later on. And something new from drummer Nasheet Waits.
And from me, well, other than waiting for the summer, you're better than me. I only thought it was one season. Well, we spend the night, but we don't see Betty. We count the leaves before they fall. We review our best side. And to kick us off, here's the Winnipeg Jazz Orchestra with something Islanders were all used to, Tidal Currents. love the way they just let the piano fade away at the end there with that chord held under the brass. Tidal Currents, taken from the Winnipeg Jazz Orchestra's release, which came out in February of this year. Tidal Currents East Meets West is the album title, and it's the band's 7th release, which features music and the arranging of two of Canada's most prolific writers for big band, who are both band leaders in their own right. Jill Townsend has 2 compositions, as does Christine Jensen. Tidal Currents is a Jill Townsend composition, inspired, she says, by the sound of the waves washing over the tiny rocks you see close to the shore, and it featured her co-composer Christine Jensen on soprano sax solo there, with a great and wonderfully fluid solo, and also a bass solo from Carl Kohut. Incidentally, there is also a new album just out from Christine's own big band, which is very good, and I'm sure to bring you on a future show. The album, as I say, has 2 tracks from each composer worth looking out for. Tidal Currents, East Meets West.
Good stuff. And now, what do you know about the low whistle? Probably not a great deal, I'd say. It's a concert whistle, and it is, as its name rather suggests, a variation of the traditional tin whistle, or penny whistle, as they're sometimes known, and distinguished by, yes, you've guessed it, a lower pitch and a larger size. You don't often hear them in jazz, it has to be said. However, my ears certainly pricked up, as did my eyes, when our good friend Rob Adams, hi to you, Rob, who's marvellous at sending great music from north of the border to us to feature here, said, here, check this one out, guys. This is rather interesting. I think you might like listening to this. Fraser Fifield's Second Sight, the low whistle master, as it says, releasing his most daring record to date, or recording at least. The 3rd in a trilogy of albums which have been supported by Creative Scotland. It will come out at the end of August this year, and it finds him working in a trio with the guitarist Graham Stephen and bassist Eli Afif. Wonderful stuff. I've only had a chance to listen to a few tracks yet, but I've been really enjoying it. Something rather different, and a sort of a crossover between there's folk in there, there's jazz in there, a bit of sort of traditional music in there as well, maybe some other influences. See what you think. Here's Second Sight. Lovely stuff. I'm liking that very much indeed. What would you call it? Folk jazz? Jazz folk? A little bit of tradition in there as well. Taking, as Fraser himself says, taking the low whistle out of its comfort zone. Not, as I say, a traditional jazz instrument at all, but it's great when you sometimes hear somewhere we've got a jazz bagpipes album, come to think of it, but it's interesting. And the jazz bassoon as well. I don't know whether that works as well as the low flute. Perhaps a little bit too cumbersome. You feel the low whistle rather is a little bit more agile, which suits, I think, jazz sensibilities somewhat more than the bassoon might. But yeah, well, that's just my personal opinion. I wanted to leave lots of space, says Fraser, to interact, and knowing Graham's capabilities in particular, I was sure he'd respond to a freer approach. That's the guitarist Graham Stephen, of course. A great creative player. It's a great creative album. Really enjoyable and difficult to classify, which is rather lovely. And another weird point, the first time I heard that one, those wonderful chords which start the track there, dee, 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 that Stephen played, I instantly thought, why do I recognise those? And I'm sure, and here's an interesting point, if you've ever watched the original series of The Avengers, the one with Patrick McNee and such like, and if you go to a classic episode called The House That Jack Built, it's very similar to the noise that the computer makes in The House That Jack Built. Every time she gets into the computer room, you hear almost exactly those chords that Graham's playing there. But that could just be me, but I'm pretty sure you'll find it's very, very similar in my mind's eye. Either way, really enjoying that one. Second Sight, low whistle, Fraser Fifield, and like I said, that it's out on the 23rd, better get the date right, of August. And thanks very much, as ever, to Rob Adams for sending that one our way.
Yes, you don't get any niche geekery on this programme, that's for sure. Funnily enough, of course, we do listen to other styles of music as well, you know, and I recently purchased a classical recording of Baroque recorder concertos, and actually a clip came up, after you've searched for anything, of course, it links it to all of your other media, and a clip came up of a recorder quartet playing alto, baritone, bass and contrabass recorder. And if you've never seen a contrabass recorder, well, it stands some 6 foot odd high. That's an instrument I've yet to find a jazz album from. Next up from me, a new release from LA saxman Scott Gilman. Scott, who's a regular on the LA scene, has toured extensively with bands as varied as Foreigner, Chaka Khan, Howard Jones, and currently with Jeff Goldblum. But he also has scored multiple TV and film releases, and so far finds him right at home with his own quintet. And here's a track taken from it, One Night at the York. If that isn't the sound of people having fun, I don't know what is. One Night at the York, taken from saxophonist Scott Gilman's recent release, So Far, with his quintet. Gary Fukushima on piano and Rhodes, that should keep our Luxembourg listeners happy. Trevor Ware on bass, Abe Lagrimas Jr. at the drums, and Joey De Leon on percussion, with Scott blowing up a storm on the tenor. And should you find yourself in the vicinity, the York is apparently a well-known LA gastropub with mid-weekly jazz sessions. So Far is out now on Conscious Records, and thanks to Lisa Reedy Promotions for sending us a copy.
Hi, my name's Tommy Smith, and welcome to Jumpin In, featuring C in H with that sweet and swing.
And my feeling is if you didn't know in advance that was Kenny Barron, you would not necessarily guess that was Kenny Barron. Certainly, like I said, we saw him last year playing a wonderful trio set with the same drummer, actually, ironically, Jonathan Blake, at Dutton Jazz Festival, and it was a wonderful set. Really, really enjoyed it, but I would say much more sort of straight ahead, a lot smoother than that. Now, to be fair, in the rest of this album, there's a lot more music which is more laid back, some more sort of nice ballad numbers, and some more what you might call sort of melodic jazz, I guess. That one's definitely got a nice edgy feel to it. As its name suggests, scratch. Kenny Barron at the piano, of course. Emmanuel Wilkins on alto sax. Steve Nelson used to play with Dave Holland for such a long time, of course, on vibes. Kiyoshi Kitagawa on double bass, and wonderful, one of my favourite drummers at the moment, Jonathan Blake, behind the kit. And that one came out a little earlier in the year. I think we heard it at a long lost jazz night. We're always having jazz nights and they never actually happen, but we did actually manage one a little earlier this summer, which was thoroughly enjoyable, with one of our namesake jazz fans up at Onkenwise, looking out over the bay. Glorious evening, couple of beers, a pizza, and playing jazz. I mean, you know, it's sort of like heaven on earth, really, isn't it? It was a glorious evening as well. And that one came up and lots of eyebrows were raising. Wow, that's really good stuff, which indeed it is. I urge you to check that one out if you haven't already. Kenny Barron, Beyond This Place, came out a little earlier in the year. Fascinating front cover as well, of a guy holding an umbrella in the rain in a sort of boat. It looks a bit like Noah's Ark floating, and probably missing some sort of very deep point on it. But either way, I like the album. I got the CD. I like the cover and I like the music. Cracking stuff.
Yeah, funny too. If you listen to perhaps Live at Bradley's 1 and 2, two of my favourite standard albums from Kenny Barron, which are really straight ahead and that much more free. Now, another name which may be unfamiliar to many listeners, saxophonist John Lloyd, but he made his impact in the 90s on the free scene, specifically with the Swiss Hat Art label. But his new quartet recording on Ubuntu has much more of an ECM aesthetic, and is none the worse for that. Martin Hummel of Ubuntu Records says John may walk softly, but he delivers an arresting sound. From their new album Earth Songs, here's Cinq Feuilles. Cinq filles, or indeed Five Leaves, a beautiful loping groove there with a strong melody, which really typifies the music on the album, I think. Laid back, gentle, yet swinging, strongly melodic throughout, a set of original compositions. John says, we present melodic, exciting and emotionally engaging compositions written by me specifically for this quartet. The members of this group have a wealth of experience across jazz and contemporary music and interpret my pieces perfectly with intelligence, energy, sensitivity, respect and enormous creativity. And indeed, the quartet work well as a unit. The band sees John rekindling a long relationship with jazz and classical piano maestro John Law, who we have seen a number of times, very enjoyable with his own congregation as well. And indeed, the pair are also working on a duet tour to follow up the tour the quartet are currently on. They're kept in check by the rhythm section of Nick Pinney on bass and Alex Goodyear at the drums. And many thanks to Martin Hummel at Ubuntu for sending us a copy. Hope we maybe will catch them later in the year, perhaps down in London.
A second outing now for Steve Nelson. We heard him just a short track or so back, but he also features on a new live album by drummer Nasheet Waits. Came out at the end of June of this year. It's entitled New York Love Letter. Bittersweet live recordings made during the pandemic, and a deeply personal statement, as it's suggested, from someone who's a lifelong New Yorker, and of course Nasheet's first call drummer amongst a whole generation of leaders, famous or obscure as it suggests, who want a drummer to render a 360-degree range of styles, authoritative execution, high musicality, great imagination and great soul and spirit. Well, I'd agree with all that. He is one of those drummers who just fits into pretty much any situation and is always tasteful, always bang on the nose. You know, you're not going to go wrong. And he needs to be on his mettle with this quartet: Mark Turner, Rashan Carter and Steve Nelson. Let's hear Snake Dance. Bit of a twofer there for you. First off, Nasheet Waits, his third album as a leader. And I think I said Snake Dance. I do apologise. Snake Stance, tricky to say, a Jason Moran track there, referring to snaky sort of behaviour in a way, as Nasheet says. You realise how important it is living in New York, being able to snake in and out, because you'll come across situations and scenarios every day you don't necessarily want to take part in. These songs spoke to that movement. Great lineup in the album, as I say, with Mark Turner, Rassan Carter, Steve Nelson on the vibes, and yeah, quite a personal statement as well. Enjoyed that one, worth checking it out. Giant Steps, and it is called New York Love Letter Bittersweet. And then to finish off, just a little bit from the AEOC, the Art Ensemble of Chicago, from the album Nice Guys. That track was called Sip.
And that's just about it for this week's show. But before we go, we have just got time for a track from the debut recording as a leader from the young Houston drummer Jeremy Dutton, released last year. You may be familiar with the name, as he's graced the drum seat on the Blue Note recordings of James Francis and Joel Ross, as well as playing with Chris Potter, Emmanuel Wilkins, Melissa Aldana, and many, many others. On Anyone Is Better Than Here, he's joined by a top-line band, including a number of his old bosses: Ben Wendell on sax, Ambrose Akinbizeri on trumpet, Joel Ross on vibes, James Francis on piano, Mike Marino on guitar, Matt Brewer and Daryl Jones on bass, and Jeremy at the drums. And from it, here's Mirrors.
We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Bye for now.